Deep diving. In this module, you will find out why it is better to make deep dives from a boat, what to do if you become separated from your buddy, learn more about the concepts of trim and buoyancy, see how you should behave before and after a deep dive, and discover more about a dive computer. Boat diving. It is best to use a boat when making deep dives, as this enables you to have important support equipment available, such as a shot line, a decompression bar, and an emergency cylinder. Also, the onboard radio means it is possible to contact rescue services immediately in case of an emergency. Lastly, you must also take into account the time it takes to swim back to the shore, especially if the bottom slopes gently. In fact, it is not easy to navigate mid-water just using a compass, and it could also be dangerous, due to boat traffic, to swim on the surface to the shore. Someone must always be left on board, whose task is to watch what is going on in the water and who is able, in case of an emergency, to provide assistance and contact the rescue services. Boats should have equipment for helping a diver in difficulty on the surface: current line, shot line, floats and buoys, boat hooks, equipment for bringing a diving casualty on board, etc. First aid kit, spares kit and tools, spare diving equipment, equipment for administering normobaric oxygen. The best thing to do is to go to a professional diving center that uses well-equipped boats. The buddy system. The buddy system is one of the essential procedures on which the safety of recreational diving is based, as the skills and techniques taught for solving many eventual problems presume the help and assistance of a buddy. Your buddy should always be close by, so they can intervene immediately in case it is necessary. This general rule assumes even greater importance on a deep dive. For example, if you suffer from inert gas narcosis on a dive, your buddy, recognizing the signs, can immediately lead you to a shallower depth. In an out-of-air situation, when your buddy is close by, you can make a shared air ascent using your buddy's air. Otherwise, you have to make a controlled emergency swimming ascent. However, on deep dives, if your buddy is some distance away, it is not advisable to make a controlled emergency swimming ascent, as this is extremely difficult to do from 40 meters, 130 feet, without incident. On deep dives, the only way to avoid serious accidents due to running out of breathing gas is to stay very close to your buddy, or use an emergency air source that is completely independent of your buddy. Auxiliary pony cylinder. If you become separated from your buddy in shallow water, you can ascend and meet up on the surface and then continue the dive. This procedure is not applicable for deep dives, as the restrictive dive time and the remaining air supply would make it impossible. Separation on deep dives means, for both members of the buddy pair, surfacing and terminating the dive. Using a shot line is a good way of staying in contact with your buddy on the descent and ascent. If you become separated, it is enough to just look up or down to find where your diving buddy is. The diver in front must wait for the other and only continue when the buddy pair is together again. When descending a shot line in a buddy pair or group, you must always check those following, not those in front. The dive can only begin when the buddies or group are together. Buoyancy. Buoyancy is the condition resulting from the action of the weight force and the lift, meaning the upward thrust exerted on an immersed body by the fluid surrounding it. An immersed object can have three conditions of buoyancy: positive if it tends to float to the surface, negative if it tends to sink towards the bottom, and neutral if it neither sinks to the bottom nor floats towards the surface. While diving, the optimal condition of buoyancy is usually neutral, as this allows a diver to stay in equilibrium at a particular depth. However, this equilibrium is not constant, because if the diver descends, the reduction in volume of the compressible equipment produces a decrease in the lift, causing a negative condition of buoyancy that must be compensated for by putting gas into the buoyancy compensator. As you ascend, the increased volume of the compressible equipment produces more lift, therefore a positive condition of buoyancy, which has to be contrasted by dumping gas from the buoyancy compensator. Your objective is therefore that of constantly maintaining a condition of neutral buoyancy for most of the dive. If this is not the case, you have to use a lot of energy trying to oppose the upward lift or the weight forcing you down. The effort of doing this can cause overexertion, leading to an increased breathing rate. Your instructor will have you practice buoyancy control. Trim. Trim is the position of an object in the water measured in respect to a horizontal plane. We can say an object has positive trim when, in respect to its direction of movement, the part in front is higher, and negative trim when it is lower. In practice, as a diver, you have positive trim when your fins are lower than your head and negative trim when this is the opposite case. The movement of a diver in the water is the result of various forces. Some act on the vertical plane, such as the weight and lift, others on the horizontal plane. When a diver wants to move forward, a resistance that opposes the movement, hydrodynamic resistance, has to be overcome using the force of the fins, and this resistance is greater the larger the surface area that is presented to the direction of movement. If a diver has a neutral condition of buoyancy, he or she can easily assume horizontal trim and so move through the water with a minimum of effort, as only a small surface area has to oppose the hydrodynamic resistance. Instead, if a diver has a negative buoyancy condition, they must assume a position of positive trim so that they obtain neutral buoyancy by finning. However, this is tiring for the diver, as the force of the fin strokes is used partly for propulsion and partly to oppose the excessive weight. And lastly, the surface area on which the hydrodynamic resistance acts is greater. In short, you have to fin very hard to make any headway at all. Positive buoyancy is not an optimal condition for a diver either. With negative trim, the effects are the same. Bad trim for a diver is not only influenced by buoyancy, but also by the incorrect distribution of the weight the diver is carrying, usually lead weights, cylinder, fins and ankle weights. So it is important that particular care is taken in the preparation and positioning of these weights. Correct trim is fundamental, as is correct buoyancy, to avoiding exertion on the dive, and this is why you will also practice ways of achieving good trim control on the dives in open water on this deep diver course. Equipment and trim. Achieving a condition of neutral buoyancy does not necessarily mean optimal trim. For example, you are neutrally buoyant, but wearing all your lead weights around your ankles. The lift is provided by the buoyancy compensator, while the barycenter is lower down, and this means you would tend to stay in a vertical position with your feet lower than your head. These rotary forces, in physics defined as moments, may be broken down into three main axes. The one that most interests diving activities is the horizontal axis perpendicular to advancement. A moment that acts on this axis will cause half the body to slant downward. In order to contrast this, you must move your weights up or down. You can make various adjustments. Change the position of the cylinder in respect to the buoyancy compensator. Position the weight belt higher or lower. Move some weights to the BC pockets. Move some weights from the belt to the shoulder strap of the BC. Wear ankle weights. Take particular care making these adjustments when you use a dry suit, because the air trapped inside the suit shifts around the body, and therefore the hydrostatic lift it creates also moves around. Planning a deep dive. It is vital to plan a deep dive more carefully than usual. First of all, you must prepare the equipment and check that it all works well. The spares kit and the first aid kit are part of this equipment. Even if you dive with a diving center, these items should already be available, but it is always best to make sure they are. When you are sure that all the equipment has been checked, you must plan the dive, also remembering to make a plan for dealing with emergencies. Dive computers must be used on deep dives. If you really must dive using tables, it is best to consider bottom time as the time between the start of the descent and the moment of reaching the depth of the safety stop. This margin will enable you to compensate for any delays that may occur during the ascent. What is more, if, when checking the tables, you have involuntarily exceeded the no deco time limit, you will already be at the depth of the emergency decompression stop. The dive computer must be checked more often than usual on a deep dive, because with the increase in depth, the no deco time limit decreases. When using a computer, it is necessary to define the maximum depth limit and establish a minimum time margin before reaching the no deco time, at least 2 to 3 minutes. This margin must be maintained during the entire dive so as to allow time to deal with any eventual emergencies. By maintaining this safety margin and getting into the habit of checking the computer every 2 minutes, if you do realize that the computer has failed, you should still be within the no deco time, so you can ascend directly to the surface without forgetting the usual safety stop. In this case, to be even safer, you can extend the safety stop to 5 minutes or more. Your buddy will help you find the right depth and monitor the time. If you have become separated from your buddy, you can use a deco marker buoy with its measured line or a spare depth gauge. If you are diving from a boat, it is even simpler because there should be the spare cylinder or a decompression bar at 5 meters, 15 feet. Following a computer failure, it is impossible to think of changing over to dive tables. It would only cause frustration to discover that you would have to make long decompression stops with only your limited supply of breathing gas. The stress this would cause would be more dangerous than the situation itself. Making a deep dive. An essential requirement for reducing the risks of deep diving is that of being prepared to postpone or renounce the dive. If you do not feel physically or psychologically prepared for the dive conditions, it is best not to even get in the water. Before a dive, it is essential to have sufficient rest, take suitable nourishment, sugars should be taken before the dive, not after, drink sufficient fluid, water or fruit juice, not take any medication or drugs, and not smoke for some hours, 5 to 8. Even just one cigarette compromises the blood's capacity to transport oxygen. Just think that while, at the present time, European Community regulations establish that the level of carbon monoxide in compressed air for divers must be as low as possible with a maximum limit set at 15 parts per million, in cigarette smoke the level is on average 20,000 parts per million. This means that after smoking a cigarette, between 3% and 7% of the hemoglobin is no longer available to transport oxygen. The situation only returns to normal after 5 to 8 hours. If you feel physically or psychologically ready for the dive, having already checked the conditions where the dive will be made, you must check that all the emergency communication systems work. If you are diving from the shore, as you do not have an onboard radio, you can use a mobile phone. However, remember, a phone is useless if it has been switched off and you do not have the PIN number. If you are diving with a diving center, the personnel should take care of providing the emergency communication systems, but it is always better to make sure. If you are taking part in a dive from a boat organized by a diving center, the staff will see to assembling the emergency cylinder and lowering it into the water with the decompression bar. The crew will also take care of setting up the shot line. You must also pay particular attention during the briefing and ask questions if there is anything that is not clear. Before a deep dive, it is best to make 4 equipment checks. The first will be done by you, the second by your buddy, and the third one by the assistants before getting in the water. Once you have gotten into the water, the fourth and final check should be made on the surface to ensure all the items of equipment are in place and that the regulators do not leak water. Descending down a shot line, hold onto it with your right hand and do not let go. It is best to make a ring with your thumb and index finger and let the line run through it. You can use your left hand to equalize, adjust your BC or control your dry suit. As soon as you reach the bottom, do not let go of the line without first checking that you are neutrally buoyant. When you move, it is best to make slow, easy movements. Avoid exerting yourself. Breathe slowly, continuously and deeply. Check your pressure gauge frequently. Do not go deeper than the agreed limit. Check your computer at least every 2 minutes. And make sure you always leave a safety margin of 2 to 3 minutes from the no-deco limit. If there is a difference between the information given by your and your dive buddy's computer, you must refer to the one giving the most restrictive parameters. If at any moment on the dive, as long as you are within the no-deco time limit, your buddy signals to ascend, there must be no delay in doing so, and you must just begin the ascent without asking for any explanation. Whenever possible, use a shot line to ascend, as it allows better control of the ascent rate and you will not be moved by the current. Dive computers also have alarms, audio and visual, that warn you if you exceed the maximum ascent rate. On reaching the decompression bar, adjust your buoyancy. Use the weights hanging from the bar if necessary, and check that you are within the no-deco time limit. If you are not, the safety stop must consequently become an emergency decompression stop, as indicated by the computer. If the bar is at 5 meters and the computer tells you to ascend to 3 meters, do not leave the decompression bar. Just stay at that depth to do the emergency decompression. The only difference is that the actual time you have to spend at that depth may be a little longer than that originally shown on the computer display. You must ascend more slowly from the depth of the safety stop. A good way is to take at least 1 minute, holding onto the line and ascending hand over hand. Once on the surface, you must rest, avoid physical exertion, and do not drink alcohol, as its effects can hide the symptoms of decompression sickness. It is best to rehydrate by drinking water or fruit juice. Finally, it is best not to repeat a deep dive on the same day. The next dive, after a long surface interval, should be to a much shallower depth. Ascending without a shot line. Using a shot line means that at the end of your dive you need to return to your starting point, and this is why, during the open water training of this course, you will practice techniques of navigating in deep water. However, low visibility, currents or navigational errors could mean that you are unable to find the line on your return. You can prevent this from happening by learning to use a reel and line. If you do not use a line and reel, you will have to use the techniques for ascending without a shot line. If you are near a wall, you and your buddy should ascend keeping close to the wall. As well as being a reference point, you are also more protected from the passage of boats on the surface. To make a free ascent, get close to your buddy so that you are able to hold on to each other at any moment and begin the ascent at the correct rate. It is essential to signal to the support boat that you are not ascending up the shot line. It's best to do this immediately while still at depth by deploying a delayed surface marker bag. If you do not have a delayed surface marker bag, you must deploy a deco marker from the depth of the safety stop. Variation in lung volume is the most immediate way of controlling buoyancy, so to maintain your depth in mid-water, you must use your hovering skills. Remember to keep your hand on the BC deflation device, so you can dump air quickly if you begin ascending too quickly. Get into a comfortable position and constantly check your computer. In a situation when you do not have any support to help you maintain the correct depth, it is best to make the safety stop or any eventual emergency decompression at 5 meters, 15 feet, even if the computer indicates a shallower depth. This will allow for any accidental variation in depth due to difficulty in controlling buoyancy. In the next module, we will examine the open water exercises in detail. Only after you have done them all correctly can you claim to be deep divers. See you soon.